In the second era of classical music known as the Baroque period, where the music was filled with harpsichords and royal regal music fit for kings that sounded straight out of the Renaissance era, no one stood taller than Bach. His music was classy and complicated. Lots of instruments playing fast, complicated music that should have sounded like noise, but somehow added up to beautiful melodies. He was a master of the concerto. He competes with Vivaldi as the greatest composer of violin music ever. But his greatest asset was his work as an organist. Plain and simply, Bach was the greatest organ player who ever lived or ever will live. His organ music was often gothic, majestic, and rather spooky. His most famous piece, the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, is the most famous piece of organ music ever. It's a work everyone knows, even if they didn't know who wrote it. The piece has been used in countless shows, media, and movies, and it was used to great effect in the classic horror film Tales from the Crypt. If something is scary, there's a good chance this piece will be playing in the background, which is rather ironic because Bach never intended to write scary music, it just happened to be that way. And since he was a devout Christian, he might be horrified that this music was used this way. As a man, Bach was unusual among composers because he was actually happy. He was a family man with 20 kids. Yeah, that's right. And most of them became composers in their own right, especially Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, also known as CPE Bach, and my personal favorite, Johann Christian Bach, otherwise known as J.C. Bach, who was friends with Mozart and influenced him. He believed music was best when it helped spread God's word. And lots of his music, even his spooky organ pieces, were played in church. Now that's a sermon I could actually sit through. His other most famous piece is the beautiful piece, Jesus, Joy of Man's Desiring, which is often played in snippets at weddings. Even though he was a Lutheran, he wrote music for Catholics called the Mass and B minor, which some people literally consider the greatest piece of music ever written, period. I'm not huge into classical vocal music, especially opera, unless it's requiems, but I still think it's good despite that. Not being my taste, that is. The Brandenburg concertos, however, that was the best series of concertos ever written. Oddly enough, he wasn't widely known in his time as a composer. He is basically just known as a great organ player. Actually, his most famous son, C.P.E. Bach, was more famous than his dad. And Daddy Bach was considered to be an old-fashioned guy stuck in the past who was only a cult figure among fellow composers, like Mozart and Beethoven. It wasn't until much later when the great Felix Mendelssohn dug his hero's music from the vaults and made it popular and in vogue. These days, everyone knows how great Bach was. He wasn't the only admirer, though. Far from it. Rock music superstars from the Beatles and the Beach Boys to prog bands like Procol Harum, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, and even Pink Floyd have all been influenced by the great Johann Sebastian Bach.